The letter from the bank arrived on the coldest morning of winter, and Vincent Thorne read it 3 times before his hands stopped shaking. The debt was settled, all of it. Every copper piece he owed for the farm, for the seed he had bought on credit last spring, for the tools he had purchased when his father's old ones finally broke beyond repair. Someone had paid it all, and the bank would not say who. Vincent stood in his small kitchen, the paper trembling in his grip, and tried to make sense of it. He was a veteran of the border wars, a man who had seen things that still woke him in the night with his heart hammering against his ribs. He had learned to read terrain, to sense ambushes, to know when something was wrong. And everything about this felt wrong. He looked around his modest home, the cabin he had built with his own hands after returning from the war 5 years ago. The wooden walls were solid, the roof kept out the rain, and the fireplace drew well. It was not much, but it was his. Or it had been, until the debts had piled up and the bank had started sending letters with words like foreclosure and repossession. Now those debts were gone. Vincent pulled on his heavy coat and stepped outside. Snow covered his fields, the ground frozen hard beneath. Spring would come eventually, and he would need to plant. But first, he needed answers. The wind cut across the open land, carrying the scent of pine from the forest that bordered his property. He had 40 acres, most of it cleared for farming, with a small orchard and a barn that housed his 2 horses and handful of chickens. It was a lonely place, miles from the nearest town, but Vincent had chosen it deliberately. After the war, he had wanted quiet. He had wanted to be far from people and their judgments, their questions about what he had done and seen. He walked to the barn, his boots crunching through the snow. Inside, his horses nickered in greeting. He fed them, checking their water and spreading fresh straw, going through the familiar motions while his mind raced. Someone had paid his debts. Someone who knew how desperate his situation had been. Someone who had access to a considerable amount of money. He thought of his few neighbors, scattered across the frontier. Old Jeremiah, who lived 5 miles west, too poor to help even if he wanted to. The Miller family 10 miles south, good people but struggling with their own farm. There was no one close enough to know his troubles, no one with the means to help, unless... Vincent stopped, his hand frozen on the barn door. He thought of his nearest neighbor, the one he tried not to think about. The one who lived in the forest, in a small house he had glimpsed only once from a distance. The orc woman. He had seen her 3 times in the 2 years since she had arrived. Once at a distance, gathering wood. Once at the stream that marked the boundary between their lands, filling water buckets. And once, just once, up close. That had been 6 months ago. Vincent had been hunting, tracking a deer that he desperately needed for winter meat. He had followed it deep into the forest, farther than he usually went, and had come upon a clearing. There, crouched over a patch of herbs, had been an orc woman. She had looked up at him, and Vincent had frozen. He had fought orcs in the war. He had killed orcs in the war. The sight of green skin and tusks had sent ice through his veins, and his hand had gone automatically to his knife. But she had not attacked. She had simply stood slowly, her hands visible and empty. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with the powerful build of her kind. Her skin was a deep forest green, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. Small tusks curved up from her lower jaw, and her pointed ears were pierced with simple silver rings. They had stared at each other for a long moment. Then she had picked up her basket of herbs and walked away, disappearing into the trees without a word. Vincent had let her go. He had not followed, had not called out. He had simply stood there, his heart pounding, remembering the war, remembering the screams and the blood and the faces of his friends who had not come home. But he had also remembered something else. The orc woman's eyes. They had been brown, deep and wary, and filled with something he recognized. Fear. Not of being hurt, but of being the one to cause hurt. He had seen that look in his own mirror too many times. After that, he had noticed signs of her presence. Footprints near the stream. Smoke from her chimney on cold mornings. Once, he had found a deer carcass that had been butchered, the meat taken but the hide and bones left neatly arranged. She was living off the land just as he was. She was a neighbor, just as distant and solitary as he was, and now someone had paid his debts. Vincent closed the barn and walked toward the forest. The snow was deeper here, untouched except for the tracks of rabbits and deer. He found the path, barely visible, that led through the trees. His hand rested on the knife at his belt, old instincts making him cautious, but he forced himself to keep walking. The forest was quiet, the snow muffling all sound. He walked for 20 minutes before he saw smoke rising above the trees. Another 5 minutes brought him to a small clearing, and there, tucked against the hillside, was a house. It was well built, he noticed with surprise. Stone foundation, wooden walls that fit snugly together, a roof of good shingles. A small barn stood nearby, and he could hear the soft sounds of animals within. Chickens pecked in a protected run, and a goat watched him with curious eyes. Someone lived here. Not just survived, but lived. Vincent approached the door and knocked. There was silence. Then, from within, a voice. Deep female, cautious. "Who is there?" "Vincent Thorne," he called. "Your neighbor, I need to speak with you." More silence. Then the sound of a bolt sliding back. The door opened a crack and a brown eye peered out at him. "What do you want?" The voice was careful, each word precisely formed. "I want to know if you paid my debts," Vincent said bluntly. The eye blinked. Then the door closed. Vincent waited, feeling foolish. But just as he was about to knock again, the door reopened. This time it swung wide, and the orc woman stood in the doorway. She was as he remembered. Tall, strong, with green skin that looked darker in the winter light. She wore simple clothes, a wool dress under a heavy apron, and her feet were bare despite the cold. Her face was hard to read, but her shoulders were tense. "Come in," she said. "You will freeze standing there." Vincent hesitated. Every instinct from the war screamed at him not to enter an orc dwelling, not to put himself in a confined space with one of the enemy. But he thought of the letter in his pocket, of the impossible gift someone had given him, and he stepped inside. The interior was warm and smelled of bread and herbs. A fire burned in a stone fireplace, and the single room was neat and organized. Shelves held jars of preserved food and dried plants. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center, and a bed stood in one corner, neatly made. Everything was simple but well crafted. "Sit," the orc woman said, gesturing to a chair. Vincent sat. She did not join him, instead moving to the fire and ladling something from a pot into 2 wooden bowls. She brought them to the table and set one in front of him. "Soup, thick with vegetables and meat. Eat," she said. "You walked far in the cold." "I came to ask you about the debt," Vincent said, not touching the soup. The orc woman sat across from him, her eyes fixed on her own bowl. "I paid it." The admission was so simple, so direct, that Vincent was struck silent for a moment. "Why?" he finally asked. She did not answer immediately. She picked up her spoon and ate slowly, still not meeting his eyes. Vincent waited, the warmth of the room seeping into his bones, the smell of the soup making his stomach clench with hunger he had been ignoring for too long. "You did not attack me," she said finally. "6 months ago in the forest you saw me. You knew what I was, but you did not attack." "That's not a reason to pay a man's debts," Vincent said. "It is for me." She looked up then, and her eyes met his. They were tired, he realized, deeply tired, with the kind of weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. "I have lived here for 2 years." In that time I have been to the town 3 times. Each time people threw stones, called me monster, savage. Twice men came with weapons saying they would drive me away. I had to hide in the forest until they left. Vincent felt something twist in his chest. He knew those men. Knew the hatred that the war had left behind. "You did not do that," she continued. "You saw me and you walked away. You let me be. That is worth much to me." "But the debt," Vincent said. "It was hundreds of silver pieces. Where did you get that kind of money?" For the first time, something like a smile touched her face. It was bitter. "Before the war, my clan controlled the trade routes through the northern mountains. We were not poor. When I left, I took what was mine. I have lived simply here and my money has sat unused. Better it should help someone who showed mercy than sit in a box under my floor." Vincent stared at her. "You spent your savings on a stranger. On a neighbor who did not attack me when he had cause to," she corrected. "On a soldier who saw an enemy and chose not to fight. That is rare. That is precious." They sat in silence. Vincent looked down at the soup, then picked up his spoon. The first taste was rich and savory, warming him from the inside. He ate, and after a moment the orc woman did the same. "What's your name?" Vincent asked when his bowl was half empty. She hesitated. Then, "Grisha, Grisha," he repeated. It was a strong name, solid. "Why did you leave your clan?" Her face closed. "That is a long story. I have time." She looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring something. Then she stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered forest. "My clan wanted to continue the war," she said quietly. "After the truce was signed, after the borders were drawn, they did not want peace. They wanted revenge, blood for blood, death for death. They began raiding human settlements, killing families, burning farms." Vincent's hand tightened on his spoon. "I spoke against it," Grisha continued. "I said the war had cost us enough, that more death would not bring back those we had lost, that the humans had lost as much as we had." She laughed, a harsh sound. "They called me traitor, coward. They said I had no honor, that I shamed my family, so I left. I took my belongings and I came here to the frontier where both sides have lost too much to want more fighting." "And yet people in town throw stones at you," Vincent said. "Yes," she turned back to him. "Both sides have long memories. Both sides hate well." Vincent finished his soup and set down the spoon. He thought of the war, of the things he had done, of the orc warriors he had faced, fierce and terrifying, but also of the night his company had raided an orc village, of the faces of the civilians they had found there, of the choice his commander had given them, and the choice Vincent had made. He had disobeyed orders that night. He had let a family escape instead of cutting them down. It had earned him a demotion and the distrust of his fellow soldiers, but he had not regretted it. He still did not. "I cannot accept your gift," he said finally. Grisha's eyes widened slightly. "The debt is already paid. The bank will not return the money. Then I will repay you." "You do not have to do that. I do." Vincent stood. "I will not take charity even from someone who means well. I will repay every copper, but it may take time." Grisha studied him. Then she nodded slowly. "As you wish, but there is no hurry. I do not need the money now." Vincent moved toward the door, then paused. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did. Even if I plan to repay it, thank you for the kindness. You are welcome, Vincent Thorne." He opened the door and stepped out into the cold. As he walked back through the forest, his mind was churning. He had a plan forming, rough and uncertain, but a plan nonetheless. When he reached his cabin, he sat at his small table and took out paper and pen. He wrote carefully, listing what he owed and what he could offer in return. He was a farmer, yes, but he was also a skilled carpenter and a decent hunter. He could offer labor, goods, barter. He would find a way to repay her. And in doing so, perhaps he would learn more about the orc woman who lived alone in the forest, who had spent her fortune on a neighbor's kindness. The next day, Vincent returned to Grisha's home. He brought with him a haunch of venison, fresh killed that morning, and a plan. She opened the door at his knock, surprise clear on her face. "Vincent Thorne." "I have a proposal," he said. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, and he entered. The house was warm again, and something was cooking on the fire. She gestured to the table, and they sat. Vincent laid out the venison. "For the soup yesterday, and for your hospitality." Grisha looked at the meat, then at him. "You did not have to do that, I know, but I wanted to." He pulled out his paper. "I have calculated what I owe you. With the interest the bank would have charged, it comes to 530 silver pieces. I did not pay interest. The debt was 490. You saved me from interest. That has value." He tapped the paper. "I can pay you back in goods and labor. I am skilled at carpentry, decent at hunting, and I know farming. I can offer you fresh meat each week, help with repairs or building projects, and a share of my harvest come autumn." Grisha was quiet for a long moment. "You would come here regularly?" "To bring these things?" "Yes, people will talk. If they see you visiting an orc, let them talk." She shook her head slowly. "You do not understand. The town already distrusts you for living out here alone. If they think you are consorting with an orc, they will turn on you. They might drive you away or worse. That's my problem, not yours. It will become my problem when they come here with torches," Grisha said, an edge of frustration in her voice. "I do not want violence. I do not want trouble." Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Then what do you suggest?" "I will not simply forget the debt. I will not be obligated without repaying it." Grisha stood and paced to the window. She was silent for so long that Vincent thought she might not answer. Then she turned back to him. "There is something you could do," she said slowly. "Something I need help with but cannot do alone." What? She walked to a chest in the corner and opened it. From within, she pulled out a rolled parchment. She brought it to the table and unrolled it. It was a deed. "When I bought this land, I bought 40 acres, she said. "The same as you. But I only use about 5 around my house and barn. The rest is forest, untouched. I want to clear some of it. Not all, but enough to plant an orchard and expand my garden, maybe build a larger barn." Vincent studied the deed, then looked at her. "That's months of work." "Yes. And I cannot hire humans from the town. They would not work for an orc, no matter what I paid. But if you would help me in exchange for the debt, I would consider us even." "Months of work for 500 silver," Vincent said. "That's a fair trade, perhaps more than fair. But I have my own farm to tend. We could work together. Some days on my land, some days on yours. Share the labor, share the harvest." It was a practical suggestion. More than practical, it was sensible. 2 people working together could accomplish far more than 2 working separately. And yet Vincent hesitated, thinking of the implications. "If people see us working together, they will think we're allies," he said. "The town will turn against both of us." "They have already turned against me," Grisha said. "And you live far enough from them that you barely count as part of their community anyway." Would it truly be so different? Vincent thought about that. He went to town perhaps once a month to trade and buy supplies. People were polite enough, but distant. He had no friends there, no close connections. The war had taken those or changed him too much to maintain them. "I suppose not," he admitted. "Then we have an agreement?" Grisha asked. Vincent looked at her, really looked at her. She was standing straight, her chin up, but there was something vulnerable in her eyes. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the desperate wish not to be alone anymore. He knew that feeling. "We have an agreement," he said, and held out his hand. Grisha looked at his hand for a moment, then reached out and clasped it. Her grip was strong, her palm calloused from work. They shook once formally, and Vincent felt something shift. A decision made, a path chosen. When do we start? He asked. Tomorrow. The weather is clear. Tomorrow, Vincent agreed. He left soon after, walking back through the forest with his thoughts in turmoil. He had just agreed to spend months working alongside an orc, an enemy by the standards of his people, a monster by the standards of the war, but Grisha did not seem like a monster. She seemed like a woman trying to build a life in a hard place, same as him. That night, Vincent lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. He thought of the war, of the blood and fear. But he also thought of Grisha's tired eyes, of her neat house and careful speech, of the kindness that had prompted her to pay a stranger's debts. People were more complicated than the war had taught him. He was starting to remember that. The next morning, Vincent packed tools and walked to Grisha's land. She was waiting for him, dressed in sturdy work clothes and boots. Together, they walked to the edge of the cleared area and surveyed the forest beyond. "We will start here," Grisha said, pointing to a section of mixed hardwoods. "Clear enough space for an orchard, maybe 30 trees with room to grow." Vincent nodded, calculating. "That will take at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then we should begin." They worked side by side, falling into a rhythm. Vincent felled trees with his axe, the familiar motion easing the tension in his shoulders. Grisha trimmed branches and dragged the logs to a pile for later processing. They did not talk much, both focused on the labor, but the silence was companionable rather than awkward. By midday, Vincent's arms ached and sweat dripped down his back despite the cold. Grisha called a halt, and they walked back to her house. She had prepared food, simple bread and cheese with cold meat, and they ate in silence. "You are skilled with an axe," Grisha said finally. "Years of practice. I built my cabin myself." "It is a good cabin. Thank you. Your house is well built too." "I hired a human carpenter from 2 towns over, someone who did not know what I was until the work was done, and I paid him." There was bitterness in her voice. "He left quickly after that." Vincent took a bite of bread. "People are afraid of what they do not understand." "People are afraid of what they have been taught to hate," Grisha corrected. "Understanding has nothing to do with it." She was right, and Vincent knew it. He had been taught to hate orcs from childhood, the lessons reinforced by stories and songs and eventually by war. It was a deep-rooted thing, visceral and hard to shake. But sitting here, eating bread with an orc woman who had shown him unexpected kindness, Vincent found that hate harder to hold on to. They worked for another few hours, then Vincent headed home to tend his own animals and prepare for the next day. The pattern repeated over the following weeks. Morning work on Grisha's land, afternoon work on his own, evening chores and rest. Slowly, the orchard site took shape, the trees cleared and the stumps removed, the ground leveled and prepared for spring planting. They talked more as the days passed. Small things at first, careful subjects. The weather, the work, the habits of the local wildlife. But gradually the conversations deepened. One afternoon, as they were hauling logs, Vincent asked, "Do you miss your clan?" Grisha was quiet for a long moment. Then, sometimes. "I miss my sister, my mother, but I do not miss the violence or the anger that filled every day. I do not miss being told that my worth was measured only in how many enemies I could kill." "The army was like that," Vincent said. "Every day was about being ready to kill or be killed. After a while, it was hard to remember there was anything else." "Is that why you live alone?" "Partly. Also because I am not easy to be around anymore. Too many memories, too much anger." Grisha glanced at him. "You do not seem angry." "I hide it well." They continued working, but Vincent felt something loosen in his chest. It was strange talking about this. He had not spoken of the war to anyone in years, had kept it all locked inside. But Grisha understood in a way that no one else could. She had her own wars to carry. On a cold evening 3 weeks into their work, a storm rolled in. Vincent had stayed late, trying to finish clearing a stubborn section of roots, and the first drops of rain caught him by surprise. Within minutes, it was a downpour. "Come," Grisha called, appearing at his side. "You cannot walk home in this." They ran to her house, reaching it soaked and shivering. Inside, Grisha immediately went to the fire and built it up, then brought Vincent a blanket. "Sit," she ordered. "Warm yourself." Vincent obeyed, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders. Grisha disappeared into a corner and returned with dry clothes, simple but clean. "These may fit you. They were meant for someone else, but I do not need them." Vincent took them gratefully and changed while Grisha turned away to give him privacy. The clothes fit well enough, warm and dry. When he emerged, she had prepared tea, the steam rising from 2 cups on the table. They sat, drinking in silence as the storm raged outside. Rain hammered on the roof, and wind howled through the trees. It was the kind of storm that could last all night, and Vincent resigned himself to waiting it out. "Tell me about your sister," he said eventually. Grisha's face softened. "Mara. She is younger than me by 5 years. When I left, she wanted to come with me, but I would not allow it. I did not know if I would survive out here alone, and I did not want her to suffer for my choices." "Do you know if she is well?" "No, the clan does not send word to exiles. For all they care, I am dead." The pain in her voice was clear. Vincent understood that, too. He had friends from the war, good men he had fought beside, but after he had let that orc family go, after the demotion and the whispers, those friendships had withered. He was alone by choice, but also by circumstance. "I am sorry," he said, "as am I, but it is the price of my choices." They fell silent again, listening to the storm. Eventually, Grisha stood and prepared a simple supper of stew and bread. They ate together, and as the night wore on, Vincent found himself relaxing in a way he had not in years. The house was warm, the food was good, and the company was pleasant. Surprising, but pleasant. "You can sleep here tonight," Grisha said as the evening grew late. "The storm will not break until morning. I have blankets, and the fire will keep you warm." Vincent wanted to protest, to insist on walking home despite the weather. But the storm was truly fierce now, and attempting the journey would be foolish. "Thank you," he said. Grisha made him a bed near the fire, piling blankets and furs to create a comfortable nest. She retreated to her own bed in the corner, and they settled in for the night. But Vincent could not sleep. He lay there, listening to the storm and thinking about the strangeness of his situation. He was sleeping in an orc's home, safe and warm, after weeks of working beside her. If his old commander could see him now, the man would probably court-martial him all over again. And yet, this felt right in a way that the war never had. "Vincent," Grisha's voice came soft from the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes, thank you for helping me, for not treating me like a monster." Vincent rolled onto his side, though he could not see her in the dark. "You are not a monster, Grisha. Many would disagree, many are wrong." There was a long pause. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Good night, Vincent." "Good night, Grisha." He fell asleep to the sound of rain and felt, for the first time in years, something almost like peace. Spring came slowly to the frontier, the snow melting in patches and the ground turning to mud before finally drying enough to work. Vincent and Grisha had finished clearing the orchard site and had moved on to other projects, building a larger barn and expanding Grisha's garden. They fell into an easy partnership, their movements coordinated after months of working together. Vincent found himself looking forward to the days they spent on her land, to the simple satisfaction of shared labor and the conversations that came with it. Grisha was educated, he learned. She could read and write in 3 languages, and she knew more about herbs and healing than anyone he had ever met. She was also funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him laugh more than he had in years. He began bringing things to share. A book he thought she might enjoy, a jar of honey he had traded for in town, a set of carving tools he no longer used. She reciprocated with her own gifts, giving him dried herbs for cooking, a warm scarf she had knitted, a beautifully carved wooden bowl. It was friendship, Vincent realized. Genuine, uncomplicated friendship, or at least it had been uncomplicated. Lately, Vincent found himself noticing things he had not noticed before. The way Grisha's face lit up when she smiled, the strength in her arms as she worked, the sound of her laugh, rare and precious. He was developing feelings that went beyond friendship, and it terrified him. One warm spring afternoon, they were working together in her garden, planting seeds for the summer crop. Grisha was explaining the proper depth for carrots when Vincent's attention drifted. He found himself watching her hands, strong and sure, and wondering what they would feel like touching his face. "Vincent, are you listening?" He jerked back to attention. "Sorry, what?" Grisha gave him an odd look. "I said the carrots need to be planted shallow. Are you well? You seem distracted." "I am fine, just tired." She did not look convinced, but she let it drop. They finished the planting in silence, and Vincent excused himself early, claiming he had chores to attend to at home. In truth, he needed space to think. Back at his cabin, Vincent paced his small kitchen and tried to make sense of his feelings. He was attracted to an orc woman. Not just attracted, but falling for her in a way that felt deep and real and utterly impossible. Humans and orcs did not have romantic relationships. The idea was taboo, forbidden by both cultures. If anyone found out, both he and Grisha would be in danger. The town might run them out, or worse. And yet, Vincent could not stop thinking about her. Could not stop remembering the warmth of her house, the comfort of her presence, the sound of her voice in the darkness saying good night. He was in trouble. Vincent avoided Grisha for 3 days, sending word through a note left at her door that he was ill and could not work. It was a coward's move, and he knew it, but he needed time to get his emotions under control. On the 4th day, she came to his cabin. Vincent heard her knock and froze. He had been working in his barn, and he was sweaty and dirty and absolutely not ready to face her. But ignoring the knock would be even worse, so he walked to the door and opened it. Grisha stood on his porch, a basket in her hands and concern on her face. "You are ill?" she asked. "I brought supplies, herbs for fever and soup." "I am not really ill," Vincent admitted, unable to lie to her face. "I just needed some time." Her concern shifted to confusion. "Time for what?" Vincent stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. She did, setting the basket on his table and turning to face him. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Have I done something to offend you?" "No. Gods, no. You have done nothing wrong." "Then what?" Vincent ran a hand through his hair, searching for words. How could he explain this? How could he tell her that he was falling in love with her when such a thing was impossible? "I am confused," he said finally. "About things about us." "Us." Grisha's voice was very quiet. "Our friendship, our partnership, He trailed off, unable to continue. Grisha stood very still. Then slowly she nodded. "I understand." "You do." "I am not blind, Vincent, nor am I naive. I have seen how you look at me sometimes, how you linger when you should leave, how you bring me gifts that are not part of our bargain." Vincent felt heat rise to his face. "I am sorry. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable." "You have not." She took a step closer. "Because I have been doing the same." Vincent's heart stopped. "What?" "Looking at you," Grisha said softly, "lingering, wishing for things that cannot be." They stared at each other, the air between them suddenly charged. Vincent's mind was racing, his heart pounding. She felt it too. She felt the same impossible thing he felt. "This is madness," he whispered. Yes. If anyone finds out, we will both be in danger. I know. We should stop, remain friends, nothing more. We should, Grisha agreed. Neither of them moved. They stood there, in Vincent's small kitchen, while the spring sunshine streamed through the window and illuminated the impossibility of their situation. Then Grisha reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, her palm calloused from work. Vincent looked down at their joined hands, green skin against his tan, and felt something in his chest break open. "I do not know what to do," he said honestly. "Neither do I." They stood like that for a long moment, holding hands and acknowledging what could not be ignored. Then reluctantly Grisha let go. "We should think about this," she said, carefully. "The consequences would be severe." "I know. But Vincent," she met his eyes, "I do not regret feeling this way. Even if nothing comes of it, I do not regret it." "Neither do I," he said. She left shortly after, and Vincent sat at his table for a long time, thinking. The smart thing would be to end their partnership, to avoid her until the feelings faded, to protect them both from the inevitable backlash. But Vincent had spent 5 years being smart, being careful, being alone. And he was tired of it, tired of living in fear, tired of letting other people's hatred dictate his choices. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew that he was not ready to give up on this on her, not yet. The following days were strange, charged with an awareness that had not been there before. Vincent and Grisha continued working together, but now every accidental touch sent sparks through his skin. Every shared glance held weight. They did not speak of what had passed between them. Instead, they focused on the work, on the practical tasks that needed doing. But the unspoken thing hummed beneath every interaction, impossible to ignore. One afternoon, they were repairing the roof of Grisha's barn when Vincent's foot slipped. He fell, sliding down the pitched roof, and would have crashed to the ground if Grisha had not caught him. She grabbed his arm with one hand and braced herself against the roofline with the other, her strength arresting his fall. They froze like that, Vincent half hanging off the roof, Grisha holding him. Their faces were inches apart. "Careful," she said, her voice rough. "Thank you." She pulled him back up, and he climbed down on shaking legs. His heart was racing, but not from the fall. From her closeness, from the easy strength with which she had caught him, from the way she was looking at him now. "We need to talk about this," Vincent said. "We cannot keep avoiding it." Grisha climbed down to join him. "What is there to talk about? We both know the situation. We both know it is impossible." "Is it?" Vincent challenged. "We live on the frontier, far from towns and their rules. We answer to no one but ourselves. If we chose to be together, who would stop us?" "Everyone," Grisha said harshly. "The town, my clan, the soldiers who patrol the border. They would all stop us, violently if necessary." "Only if they knew," she shook her head. "Secrets do not stay secret forever. Eventually someone would find out, and when they did, we would both pay the price." Vincent stepped closer. "Maybe the price would be worth it." "You say that now, but you do not truly understand. If my clan found out, they would declare me worse than exile. They would hunt me. And you would be seen as a traitor, a human who consorted with the enemy. They might hang you. I am already a traitor in some eyes. I was court-martialed for disobeying orders, remember? That was different, that was war, this would be personal." "It is all personal," Vincent said intensely. "The hate, the fear, the anger, all of it is personal, and I am tired of letting it control my life." Grisha looked at him for a long moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "What are you proposing?" "I am proposing that we stop pretending this is not happening, that we acknowledge what we feel and figure out if there is a way forward. And if there is not, then at least we will know we tried." Grisha turned away, pacing to the edge of the clearing. Vincent waited, his heart in his throat. He had laid everything out, exposed himself completely. Now it was her choice. "I am afraid," she said finally. "I have spent 2 years alone, convincing myself that solitude was enough, that I did not need anyone, that I was content with my small life. And then you came with your debt and your stubbornness and your kindness, and everything became complicated. I know the feeling." She turned back to him. "If we do this, if we pursue this, it cannot be casual. The risk is too great for anything less than complete commitment. I understand. Do you?" She walked back to him, stopping close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "I need to know that you are certain that this is not just attraction or loneliness, that you are willing to stand with me against everything that will come." Vincent took a deep breath. "I am certain. I do not fully understand this myself, what I feel for you, but I know it is real. I know that I look forward to seeing you every day, that I think about you when I should be thinking about other things. I know that you make me laugh, that you challenge me, that you are the best person I have met in years. And I know that I want to see where this goes, regardless of the risks." Grisha's eyes were bright, and Vincent realized with shock that she was close to tears. "No one has ever said such things to me," she whispered. "No one has ever valued me for anything but my strength or my utility." "Then they were fools." She laughed, a wet sound, and wiped at her eyes. "What do we do now? I suppose we take it slow, get to know each other better, figure out if this is truly what we both want." "That sounds reasonable. But first," Vincent said, reaching out slowly to give her time to pull away, "may I hold your hand?" Grisha looked at his offered hand. Then she reached out and took it, threading her fingers through his. They stood there in the spring sunshine, holding hands and acknowledging the dangerous, impossible thing blooming between them. And for that moment, it was enough. The next few weeks were some of the happiest of Vincent's life, and also the most terrifying. He and Grisha spent every day together, working on one farm or the other, and gradually their relationship shifted from friendship to something deeper. They talked endlessly, sharing stories of their pasts. Grisha told him about growing up in her clan, about the expectations placed on orc women to be warriors and mothers. She spoke of her mother's quiet strength and her sister's fiery spirit. She described the mountains where her clan lived, the harsh beauty of the landscape, and the traditions that had bound her people for generations. Vincent shared his own history, his childhood on a farm not unlike this one, helping his father work the land. His decision to join the army when the war came, driven by patriotism and youthful idealism. The slow disillusionment as the reality of war replaced the glory he had imagined. The friends he had lost, the things he had done, the choice that had cost him everything and saved his soul. They learned each other's preferences and quirks. Grisha liked her tea strong and her bread dark. She hummed while she worked, old songs in the orcish language that Vincent found oddly soothing. She was meticulous about caring for her tools, sharpening them regularly and storing them properly. Vincent discovered that he still remembered how to laugh freely, how to enjoy simple pleasures. He taught Grisha to play cards, and she beat him soundly every time. He showed her how to fish in the stream, and they spent a peaceful afternoon catching their supper. One evening, as they sat outside Grisha's house watching the sunset, Vincent asked, "Do you ever regret leaving your clan?" Grisha considered the question. "Sometimes. I miss my family, the sense of belonging, but I do not regret standing by my principles. And if I had not left, I would not be here now, with you." She said the last words shyly, and Vincent felt warmth spread through his chest. "I am glad you are here," he said. They sat in comfortable silence, their shoulders touching. The sky turned orange and pink, and the first stars emerged. It was peaceful and perfect, and Vincent wished he could freeze this moment forever. but peace never lasted long on the frontier. The trouble came on a warm day in late spring. Vincent had gone to town for supplies, a trip he had been putting off for weeks. He hitched up his wagon and made the journey, planning to get in and out quickly. The town was busier than usual. People gathered in the square around a speaker. Vincent tried to slip past unnoticed, but a familiar voice called out to him. "Thorne, Vincent Thorne." Vincent turned to see Marcus Talbot, a former soldier who had served in the same company. Marcus approached with a wide smile that did not reach his eyes. "Thorne, it has been months. Where have you been hiding?" "Working my farm," Vincent said carefully. "Same as always." "Funny thing," Marcus said, his smile sharpening. "People have seen smoke from the forest near your land, 2 chimneys worth. And someone said they saw an orc woman in these parts. You would not know anything about that, would you?" Vincent kept his face neutral. "The forest is large." "Could be anyone." "Could be," Marcus agreed, "but you know how people talk. Some are saying that you are harboring an orc, that you are working with the enemy." "That is ridiculous." "Is it?" Marcus stepped closer. "Because I remember you in the war, Thorne. I remember how you let that orc family go instead of following orders, how you were court-martialed for it. Makes a man wonder where your loyalties lie." Vincent's hand clenched into a fist. "My loyalties are my own business, not when they affect the safety of the town." Marcus's voice carried, and Vincent realized people were listening. "If there is an orc living near here, we have a right to know. We have a right to protect ourselves." "There is no threat," Vincent said firmly. "Everyone just wants to live in peace." "Peace," Marcus scoffed. "You can't have peace with orcs. They are animals, savages, and anyone who consorts with them is a traitor." Vincent felt rage rise in his chest, hot and dangerous, but he forced it down, knowing that a fight here would only make things worse. "I am going to buy my supplies and leave," he said evenly. "I suggest you do the same." He turned and walked away, feeling Marcus's eyes on his back. At the general store, he bought what he needed quickly, ignoring the whispers and stares. Then he loaded his wagon and drove out of town as fast as his horses would allow. But as he traveled the road home, Vincent's mind was racing. Marcus's words had been a warning. People were suspicious, watching. It was only a matter of time before someone came looking. He had to warn Grisha. He drove straight to her house, abandoning his wagon at his own cabin and running through the forest. He found her in her garden, weeding between rows of young plants. "Grisha," he called. She looked up, smiling, but her expression changed when she saw his face. "What happened?" "People in town are talking. They know you are here. Someone saw smoke from your chimney and they are getting suspicious." Grisha stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I see." "Marcus Talbot, a man I knew in the war, he confronted me. He was making accusations, stirring up fear. I think they might come here." "When?" "I do not know. Soon, probably." Grisha nodded slowly. She looked around her property, at the house she had built, the garden she had planted, the life she had carved out. "I should leave." "No," Vincent said sharply. "This is your home. You have every right to be here. Rights do not matter if people come with torches and weapons. Then we will face them together." Grisha shook her head. "Vincent, if you stand with me, they will turn on you too. You will lose everything." "I have already lost everything that mattered." "Except you." The words came out before Vincent could stop them, raw and honest. Grisha stared at him. "Vincent, I mean it. You matter to me, Grisha. More than the farm, more than the town's approval, more than anything. And I am not going to let them drive you away." She crossed the distance between them and took his hands. "You are a fool, probably. A kind, stubborn, wonderful fool." She pulled him close, and Vincent wrapped his arms around her. She was solid and warm against him, and he breathed in the scent of herbs and earth that always clung to her. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "We prepare, and we stand together." They spent the rest of the day making preparations. Vincent moved some of his valuables to Grisha's house, where they would be safer from a potential raid on his cabin. They checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. Grisha showed Vincent where she kept her few weapons, a bow and a heavy staff, and they discussed how they would defend the property if necessary. As night fell, they sat at her table and ate a somber meal. "I am sorry," Vincent said. "This is my fault. If I had been more careful in town, if I had not drawn attention." "Stop," Grisha said firmly. "This is not your fault. We both knew the risks. We both chose this path. I just wish it did not have to be so hard. All worthwhile things are hard." She reached across the table and took his hand. "And you are worthwhile to me, Vincent Thorne." Vincent squeezed her hand, emotion welling up in his throat. In that moment, sitting in the warm glow of lamplight, he knew with absolute certainty that he loved her, deeply, irrevocably, completely. "Grisha," he said, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him, waiting. "I love you." The words came out steady and sure. "I know it is fast, I know it is complicated, but it is true. I love you." Grisha's eyes went wide. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It was radiant, transforming her features with joy. "I love you too," she said. "I have been trying not to, but I cannot help it. I love you, Vincent." Vincent stood and moved around the table. She rose to meet him, and they came together in a kiss that was tender and fierce at once. Her tusks pressed against his face, an unfamiliar sensation but not unpleasant. Her hands cupped his jaw, gentle despite their strength, and Vincent poured everything he felt into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Well," Grisha said, a little shaky. "That was." "Yes," Vincent agreed. They looked at each other and laughed, the tension breaking. Then they kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. That night, Vincent stayed at Grisha's house. They did not sleep together in that way, both knowing that such a step needed more time and the right circumstances. But they lay together in her bed, holding each other close, and whispered of hopes and dreams until sleep claimed them. For one night, they allowed themselves to forget the danger. For one night, they were simply two people in love. Morning came too soon. Vincent woke to sunlight streaming through the window and Grisha's arm across his chest. He lay there for a moment, savoring the warmth and comfort before reality intruded. They were in danger. The town knew about Grisha, and it was only a matter of time before someone came. He eased out of bed carefully, trying not to wake her. But her eyes opened, alert immediately. "Is it morning?" she asked. "Yes. I should go check on my cabin, make sure nothing happened during the night." Grisha sat up. "I will come with you." They dressed and walked through the forest together. The morning was beautiful, birds singing and new leaves bright green on the trees. But Vincent could not shake the sense of foreboding. His cabin was undisturbed. They checked the barn, finding his animals safe and well. Vincent fed them and collected eggs from his chickens, going through the familiar routine. "Maybe I was wrong," he said as they walked back to the cabin. "Maybe Marcus was just trying to rile me up and no one will come." Grisha did not look convinced. Maybe. They were preparing breakfast when Vincent heard horses, many horses moving fast. He and Grisha exchanged a glance, and then Vincent moved to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. A group of riders, at least 10, approaching down the road. Marcus Talbot was at the front, and Vincent recognized several other men from town. They were armed, carrying rifles and clubs. "They are here," he said. Grisha came to stand beside him. Her face was calm, but Vincent could see the tension in her shoulders. "What do? We face them." Together. Vincent opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Grisha joined him, standing at his side. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin and Marcus dismounted. "Thorne," he said, "I told you we would come, and I see you were not honest with me yesterday." "I do not owe you honesty," Vincent said coldly, Marcus's eyes fixed on Grisha. "You are harboring an orc, on land that borders human settlements. That is a threat to the entire community." "I am no threat," Grisha said, her voice steady. "I live here peacefully, bothering no one. You exist." "That is threat enough." Marcus spat on the ground. "We want you gone, orc. Pack your things and leave, or we will burn you out." "This is her land," Vincent said. "She bought it legally and has every right to be here." "Human laws do not apply to orcs," another man called out. "Actually, they do," Vincent shot back. "The treaty after the war established that orcs who live on purchased land are protected under the same laws as humans. If you attack her, you are breaking the law." Marcus scowled. "Treaties can be ignored when safety is at stake. Safety is not at stake. You are just looking for an excuse to hate. And you are a traitor," Marcus snarled. "First you let that family go in the war, and now you are defending this orc. You make me sick." Vincent felt rage boil up in him. He started to step forward, but Grisha's hand on his arm stopped him. "Do not," she said quietly. "It is what they want." She was right. Vincent forced himself to breathe, to think. Fighting would only make things worse. "We will leave," Grisha said suddenly. Vincent turned to her, shocked. "What? We will leave?" she repeated louder. "If that is what it takes to avoid violence, we will go." Marcus looked surprised, as if he had expected more resistance. "Where will you go?" "Away from here. Somewhere we will not be a threat to you." "Grisha, no," Vincent said. "This is your home." She looked at him, and her eyes were sad but determined. "Home is where you are safe and welcome. This place is neither any more." Vincent wanted to argue, but he saw the logic in her words. They could fight, but they were outnumbered. Even if they survived, the harassment would continue. The town would never accept them. "We will need time to pack," Vincent said, defeated. "You have until sunset," Marcus said. "After that we burn the place." The riders turned and left, kicking up dust as they galloped away. Vincent and Grisha stood on the porch, watching them go. "I am sorry," Grisha said. "Do not apologize. This is not your fault." "Where will we go?" Vincent thought for a moment. Then an idea came to him, wild and uncertain but possible. "East, beyond the frontier, into the unclaimed lands. There are rumors of communities there, people who left both human and orc territories to build something new." "That is dangerous. The unclaimed lands are wild. No more dangerous than staying here." Vincent took her hand. "We will build a new life together. Somewhere no one can tell us we do not belong." Grisha squeezed his hand. "Together." They spent the rest of the day packing. Vincent loaded his wagon with tools, seeds, and supplies. Grisha did the same with her own wagon, moving quickly and efficiently. They took what they could carry and left the rest. As the sun began to set, they took one last look at their homes. Vincent felt a pang of loss looking at his cabin, the place he had built with his own hands. But when he looked at Grisha, that pang eased. She mattered more than any building. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They climbed onto their wagons and started east, leaving the frontier behind. The road was rough and the journey ahead was uncertain, but they were together, and that was enough. They traveled for 2 weeks, following old trails and game paths into the unclaimed lands. The terrain was beautiful and harsh, forests giving way to rolling hills and wide valleys. They saw no other people, only wildlife and the occasional abandoned homestead. At night, they made camp and shared stories around the fire. Vincent taught Grisha songs he remembered from childhood, and she taught him words in the orcish language. They laughed and talked and held each other close against the darkness. On the 15th day, they crested a hill and saw smoke rising in the distance. Multiple chimneys, a settlement. They approached cautiously, unsure what they would find. The settlement was small, perhaps 20 buildings arranged around a central square. As they drew closer, Vincent saw something that made him stop in surprise. The people in the square were mixed. Humans and orcs, working side by side. Children played together, their laughter ringing clear. A human woman stood talking with an orc man, their conversation animated but friendly. "Is this real?" Grisha whispered. "I think so." They entered the settlement and people turned to look. But instead of hostility, Vincent saw curiosity and welcome. An older human man approached, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Welcome, travelers. I am Elder Samuel. You look like you have come a long way." "We have," Vincent said. "From the frontier. We were looking for a place where humans and orcs can live in peace." "Then you have found it," Samuel said. "We are all refugees here, those who did not fit in the territories. We have built something new, something better. You are welcome to stay if you wish." Vincent looked at Grisha. Her eyes were bright with tears and she nodded. "We would like that," Vincent said. They were given a small house on the edge of the settlement with land enough to farm. Over the following weeks they settled in, meeting their new neighbors and learning the rhythms of this strange, wonderful community. There were rules, Samuel explained. No violence, no discrimination, no hatred based on race. Everyone worked together, shared resources, and protected each other. It was not perfect, but it was better than anything Vincent had known. He and Grisha threw themselves into building their new life. They planted crops, repaired their house, and integrated into the community. People welcomed them without question, accepting their relationship without judgment. One evening, several months after their arrival, Vincent and Grisha sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked. Grisha leaned against him. "Yes, are you?" "Yes." They sat in comfortable silence. Then Grisha said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About making this permanent. About vows and commitment." Vincent's heart skipped. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" She pulled back to look at him. "I want to marry you, Vincent Thorne. By human custom, by orc custom, by whatever custom this community recognizes. I want to stand before everyone and declare that we belong to each other." Vincent felt joy swell in his chest, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes, gods, yes, I want that too." They kissed, sealing the promise. Around them, the settlement went about its evening business, people living and laughing and being together. It was peaceful and perfect, everything they had hoped for. The wedding was held a month later in the settlement square. Elder Samuel officiated and the entire community attended. Vincent wore his best clothes, and Grisha wore a dress she had sewn herself, beautiful in its simplicity. They exchanged vows that mixed human and orc traditions, promising to stand by each other through hardship and joy, through danger and peace. When Samuel pronounced them married, the crowd cheered, and Vincent kissed his wife with his whole heart. The celebration lasted into the night, with food and music and dancing. Vincent danced with Grisha under the stars, holding her close and marveling at how far they had come. From a paid debt and averted eyes at supper to this moment of complete happiness. Later, when they returned to their home, Grisha stopped at the door. "What is it?" Vincent asked. "I am just savoring this," she said. "The knowledge that this is ours. That we built this together despite everything." "We did," Vincent agreed, "and we will keep building, for the rest of our lives." "For the rest of our lives," Vincent echoed. They entered their home together, husband and wife, and closed the door on the past. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of possibility. But whatever came, they would face it together. The seasons turned, and Vincent and Grisha's life in the settlement flourished. Their first harvest was modest but sufficient, and they traded their surplus with neighbors for other goods. Vincent's carpentry skills were in demand, and he found himself helping to build new structures as the settlement grew. Grisha's knowledge of herbs made her invaluable, and people came to her for remedies and healing. They made friends, real friends, for the first time in years. There was Thomas, a human man who had fled the war after losing his family, and Nara, an orc woman who had been exiled for refusing to bear children for her clan. There was Marcus, a different Marcus, Vincent was careful to note, a half-orc whose mixed heritage had made him unwelcome in both cultures. These people became their community, their chosen family. On winter evenings, they gathered in each other's homes, sharing meals and stories. Vincent found himself laughing more than he had thought possible, his old wounds healing slowly in the warmth of acceptance. One night, as snow fell softly outside, Grisha made an announcement. They were sitting around Thomas's fire, cups of hot cider in hand, when she spoke. "Vincent and I have news," she said, her hand finding his. Everyone turned to them, curious. Vincent smiled, squeezing her hand in encouragement. "I am pregnant," Grisha said simply. The room erupted. Nara jumped up to hug Grisha, while Thomas clapped Vincent on the back so hard he nearly spilled his cider. Questions flew, everyone talking at once, excitement filling the air. When the initial chaos died down, Elder Samuel raised his cup. "To Vincent and Grisha, and to the next generation. May your child grow up in a world better than the one we knew." "Hear, hear," everyone chorused, drinking to the toast. Vincent looked at Grisha, seeing the joy and fear mixed in her eyes. They had talked about children, wondering if it was even possible for a human and an orc to have offspring. Apparently it was, and now they would find out what that meant. The pregnancy was not easy. Grisha suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Vincent spent many mornings holding her hair while she retched. But gradually that passed, and she began to bloom. Her belly swelled, and Vincent would often wake to find her awake beside him, one hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move. "You think it will look more human or more orc?" she asked one night. "I think it will look like us," Vincent said, "perfect and ours. I hope it has your eyes. I hope it has your strength." They prepared a nursery in their small house, building a cradle and sewing blankets. Nara taught Grisha old orc lullabies, while Thomas's wife showed her how to swaddle an infant. The whole community rallied around them, excited for the first child born in the settlement. Labor came on a warm summer night. Vincent rowed hard to fetch the midwife while Nara stayed with Grisha. The hours that followed were the longest of Vincent's life, pacing outside while Grisha's cries echoed from within. He had faced battle without this level of fear, knowing that there was nothing he could do to help, nothing but wait. Finally, just as the sun rose, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and indignant. The door opened and the midwife emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a daughter," she said. "Both mother and child are well." Vincent rushed inside. Grisha lay in bed, exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle. He approached slowly, awestruck. The baby was perfect. Her skin was a soft olive green, lighter than Grisha's but darker than Vincent's. She had wisps of dark hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were brown flecked with green. Her ears were slightly pointed, her features a delicate blend of both her parents. "She is beautiful," Vincent whispered. "You want to hold her?" Grisha asked. Vincent took his daughter carefully, supporting her head as he had been taught. She was so small, so fragile, and yet she gripped his finger with surprising strength. "Hello," he said softly. "I am your father." The baby looked at him with solemn eyes, and Vincent felt his heart expand to hold this new, overwhelming love. "What should we name her?" Grisha asked. They had discussed names, but nothing had felt right. Now, holding his daughter, Vincent thought of the journey they had taken, of the settlement that had welcomed them, of the hope they represented. "Hope," he said. "We should name her Hope." Grisha smiled. "Hope, yes, that is perfect." The settlement celebrated Hope's birth with joy. She became the darling of the community, passed from arm to arm, cooed over and spoiled. As she grew, she showed signs of both her heritages. She was strong like her mother, but had her father's curiosity and gentle nature. She learned to walk early, toddling after the chickens with delighted shrieks. She learned to talk in a mix of human and orcish words, switching between languages without thought. Vincent and Grisha watched her grow with wonder and pride. On difficult days, when old memories surfaced or the challenges of their new life seemed overwhelming, they would look at Hope and remember why they had chosen this path. On Hope's first birthday, the settlement threw a festival. There was food and music and laughter, and Hope sat in the middle of it all, clapping her hands and grinning her tusked smile at everyone. That evening, as the celebrations wound down, Vincent and Grisha sat on their porch with Hope drowsing between them. The sky was full of stars, and the sounds of the settlement settling in for the night drifted on the warm air. "You ever miss the frontier?" Grisha asked. Vincent considered the question. "Sometimes. I miss the quiet and I miss the farm I built, but I do not miss the loneliness. And I do not miss living in fear." "I miss my sister," Grisha admitted. "I wonder if she is well, if she ever thinks of me." "Maybe someday we can find out when things are safer, maybe." Grisha leaned against him. "But this is enough, this life we have built, this family. It is more than I ever dreamed of having. It is more than I deserved," Vincent said. "You deserved happiness, Vincent. We both did." They sat in silence, holding their sleeping daughter, and watched the stars wheel overhead. The past was behind them, painful but survived. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility. Vincent thought back to that cold winter morning when he had received the letter from the bank, to his confusion and suspicion, and the decision to walk into the forest and confront his mysterious benefactor. That choice had changed everything, had led him to this moment of perfect contentment. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Grisha asked. "For paying my debt. For showing me that there was more to life than anger and solitude. For loving me." Grisha turned and kissed him, soft and sweet. "Thank you for seeing me, not as an orc or an enemy, but as a person, for having the courage to love me back." Hope stirred between them, making a small sound of protest at being jostled. They both laughed quietly, adjusting to make her more comfortable. "We should get her to bed," Vincent said. "In a minute. I want to stay here a little longer." So they stayed, the three of them together under the stars. A human, an orc, and their daughter. A family that should not exist by the rules of the world they had left behind. A family that proved those rules were wrong. Years continued to pass in the settlement, and life took on a comfortable rhythm. Hope grew from a toddler into a bright, energetic child. She was clever and kind, with a talent for bringing people together. She played with human and orc children alike, seeing no difference between them, and her innocence helped heal old wounds in others. Vincent's carpentry business expanded. He took on apprentices, teaching young people the skills his father had taught him. He built houses and barns, furniture and tools, each piece crafted with care. His work became known beyond the settlement, and occasionally travelers would come specifically seeking his services. Grisha became the settlement's primary healer. Her knowledge of herbs expanded as she experimented and learned from books that Elder Samuel's library provided. She tended injuries, delivered babies, and sat with the dying, offering comfort in their final hours. People trusted her completely, bringing her their fears and pains without hesitation. Together they prospered. Not in terms of wealth, though they lived comfortably, but in terms of community and purpose. They had found their place in the world, and it was good. When Hope turned 5, she began formal schooling. The settlement had established a small school where children learned reading, writing, mathematics, and history. But it was a different history than what was taught in the territories, one that acknowledged both human and orc perspectives, that did not demonize either side. Hope excelled at her studies, her quick mind absorbing information eagerly. She came home each day bursting with questions, and Vincent and Grisha would spend evenings answering them as best they could. "Papa," Hope asked one night, "why do humans and orcs fight?" Vincent exchanged a glance with Grisha. They had known such questions would come eventually. "People fight when they are afraid," Vincent said carefully, "or when they believe that someone else is a threat to them or their families. But you are human and Mama is an orc, and you do not fight." "That is because we chose to see past our differences. We chose to understand each other rather than fear each other." Hope considered this, her small face serious. "Then people who fight are making the wrong choice." "Sometimes," Grisha said, "but it is not always that simple, little one. Fear is powerful and hatred can be taught. It takes great courage to choose differently." "You and Papa are brave," Hope declared. "We try to be," Vincent said, ruffling her hair. "And you are brave too, Hope. You are proof that humans and orcs can not only live together, but create something beautiful together." Hope beamed at the praise, then went back to her dinner. But Vincent saw Grisha's eyes were wet, and he reached under the table to squeeze her hand. When Hope was 7, a group of travelers arrived at the settlement. They were refugees from a border skirmish, humans and orcs who had fled together when their villages were caught in the fighting. They were traumatized and exhausted, carrying all their possessions on their backs. The settlement welcomed them, as it always did. Vincent helped build temporary shelters while Grisha tended their injuries and illnesses. Hope, meanwhile, took it upon herself to welcome the refugee children, showing them around and sharing her toys. One of the refugees was a young orc woman named Kara. She was quiet and withdrawn, flinching at sudden movements, and Grisha recognized the signs of deep trauma. "Would you like to help me in the garden?" Grisha asked her one day. "I find that working with plants can be very soothing." Kara agreed hesitantly, and they spent the afternoon in companionable silence, weeding and watering. Gradually, as the days passed, Kara began to open up. "I lost my family in the fighting," she said one afternoon. "My parents, my siblings, I am alone now." "You are not alone," Grisha said firmly. "You have found a new community here. We will be your family if you let us." Kara looked at her with hope and disbelief mixed in her eyes. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because someone did it for me once. When I arrived here, broken and afraid, this settlement gave me a home. Gave me a chance to build a new life. I want to offer you the same." Kara began to cry, and Grisha held her while she sobbed out her grief and pain. It was a turning point, the beginning of healing. Kara eventually became part of their extended family. She lived in a small house near Vincent and Grisha's and often joined them for meals. She and Hope formed a close bond, with Kara becoming like an older sister to the girl. On Hope's 10th birthday, the settlement threw a celebration. Hope was growing tall and strong, her features settling into a unique beauty that reflected both her heritages. She was popular among the other children, a natural leader with her mother's confidence and her father's kindness. During the party, Elder Samuel pulled Vincent and Grisha aside. "I wanted to tell you both," he said, "how grateful I am that you came here. You and Hope represent everything this settlement stands for. You are proof that a different world is possible." "We are grateful to you," Vincent said, "for building this place, for giving us sanctuary." "We built it together," Samuel corrected. All of us. And we will continue to build it for our children and their children, for Hope's generation, who will grow up knowing that love matters more than heritage. It was a beautiful sentiment, and Vincent felt its truth deep in his bones. Hope's generation would be different. They would be raised without the old hatreds, taught to see people as individuals rather than as members of enemy races. It was what he and Grisha had fought for, sacrificed for, and it was working. That night, after the party ended and Hope was asleep, Vincent and Grisha lay in bed and talked quietly. "You think we should tell her?" Grisha asked. "About how we met, about the debt and the exile and everything we went through?" "Someday," Vincent said, "when she is old enough to understand. She should know where we came from and what we overcame to build this life. I hope she is proud of us. She will be, just as we are proud of her." They fell silent, holding each other in the darkness. Outside, the settlement slept peacefully, protected and whole. It was not perfect, this life they had built. There were still challenges, still moments of fear and doubt. But it was theirs, earned through courage and love, and that was everything. More years passed and the settlement continued to grow. What had started as 20 buildings expanded to 50, then 100. New refugees arrived regularly, drawn by rumors of a place where humans and orcs lived in peace. The settlement became a beacon, proof that coexistence was possible. Vincent and Grisha aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. Hope grew into a remarkable young woman, intelligent and compassionate, with a gift for diplomacy that surpassed even Elder Samuel's. She began taking on leadership roles in the settlement, mediating disputes and welcoming newcomers. On Hope's 18th birthday, she came to her parents with an announcement. "I want to become a traveling ambassador," she said. "I want to visit the territories, both human and orc, and tell them about this place. Show them that peace is possible." Vincent felt fear clutch at his heart. "That is dangerous, Hope. Both sides still harbor hatred. They might hurt you. They might," Hope agreed, "but they might also listen. I am proof that humans and orcs can come together. My very existence challenges their assumptions. I have to try." Grisha took Hope's hand. "You are so brave, daughter, braver than either of us." "I learned from you," Hope said simply. "You showed me that loving across boundaries is not only possible but necessary. Now I need to share that message with others." Vincent wanted to argue, to keep his daughter safe at home, but he saw the determination in her eyes, the same determination he had seen in Grisha all those years ago. Hope had her mother's strength and her father's compassion, and she would not be dissuaded. "Then we will support you," he said finally, "but please be careful." "I will, Papa." Hope began her journeys the following spring. She traveled with a small group of companions, visiting villages and towns on both sides of the border. Her message was simple. Peace was possible, love was stronger than hate, and people of different races could build a future together. The reception was mixed. Some places welcomed her message eagerly, tired of war and hatred. Others rejected her violently, throwing stones and insults. But Hope persisted, her courage never wavering. She sent letters home regularly, describing her travels and the people she met. Vincent and Grisha read each one multiple times, proud and terrified in equal measure. One letter described meeting with a group of human veterans, men like Vincent who had fought in the war. Hope had told them her parents' story, about the debt and the exile and the love that had grown in spite of everything. Several of the veterans had wept, admitting that they too felt the weight of hatred and longed for something different. Another letter told of visiting an orc clan in the mountains. The clan elders had been hostile at first, but Hope had spoken in fluent Orcish, showing her respect for their traditions while sharing her vision of peace. By the end of her visit, Several young orcs had asked to join her on her journey, wanting to see the settlement for themselves. Slowly, gradually, Hope's message spread. More refugees came to the settlement, not fleeing violence but seeking the peace they had heard about. The community expanded again, and new settlements began forming nearby, built on the same principles of acceptance and cooperation. Vincent watched these changes with wonder. What he and Grisha had started, what they had fought for in their small way, was growing into something much larger. A movement, a shift in how people thought about race and relationships. It was not universal. The territories still maintained their borders, still viewed each other with suspicion. But cracks were forming in the old hatreds, and Hope was one of those widening those cracks. On Vincent's 50th birthday, the settlement threw a celebration. It had become tradition to honor the founding families, and Vincent and Grisha were counted among them. During the feast, Elder Samuel stood to make a speech. 20 years ago, he said, a man and an orc woman arrived at our gates. They were refugees, fleeing prejudice and hatred, seeking only a place where their love could exist without fear. We welcomed them, as we welcome all who come in peace. But what we did not know then was how much they would give back to us. Samuel gestured to Vincent and Grisha. Vincent Thorne and Grisha have been pillars of this community. Vincent's skilled hands have built countless structures, giving people homes and safety. Grisha's knowledge has saved lives, her healing touching nearly every family here. But more than that, their love has been an inspiration, and their daughter, Hope, has taken that inspiration and shared it with the world. The crowd applauded, and Vincent felt emotion swell in his throat. Grisha's hand found his under the table, and he squeezed it tightly. We are all refugees here, Samuel continued. Refugees from war, from hatred, from societies that told us we must hate each other. But we have built something different, something better. And we have Vincent and Grisha to thank for helping to show us the way. The celebration continued late into the night. Vincent danced with Grisha under the stars, just as they had on their wedding day, and marveled at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. They were older now, their hair streaked with gray, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and time. But their love was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for all they had survived together. You have any regrets? Grisha asked as they swayed to the music. Vincent thought about it. He thought about his old farm, about the life he had planned before Grisha had paid his debt. He thought about the war and the choices he had made, both good and bad. No, he said finally. No regrets. Everything I lost, everything I gave up, it was worth it for this. For you, for Hope, for this life we built together. Even though it was hard, especially because it was hard. Easy things are rarely worthwhile. Grisha smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. I love you, Vincent Thorne. I love you too, Grisha Thorne. They danced until the music ended, surrounded by their community, their family, their home. And when the night finally wound down and they walked back to their house, they did so with hearts full of gratitude and peace. The years continued their steady march. Hope's travels eventually brought her back home permanently, not because she had failed, but because she had succeeded beyond expectation. The network of peaceful settlements she had helped establish needed coordination, and Hope took on that role gladly. She married eventually, a kind human man named Daniel who shared her vision and values. Their wedding was a joyous occasion, with representatives from settlements across the region attending. Vincent walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, barely able to believe that the tiny baby he had held 25 years ago was now a woman starting her own family. When Hope's first child was born, a boy with his father's coloring and his grandmother's strength, Vincent held his grandson and felt the circle complete. Here was the next generation, born into a world slowly healing from old wounds. Vincent was 60 when Elder Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep. The settlement mourned deeply, but they also celebrated his life and legacy. At the memorial, Hope stood and spoke about her vision for the future. "Samuel built this place as a sanctuary," she said. "But I believe it can be more than that. I believe these settlements can be the foundation for a new nation, one built on equality and cooperation rather than division and hatred. It will take time, perhaps generations, but we have already proven it is possible. We just need the courage to keep building." The crowd murmured with interest and excitement. It was an ambitious vision, perhaps impossible. But then again, 25 years ago, the idea of a human and an orc marrying and raising a family together had seemed impossible too. After the service, Hope came to her parents. "What do you think? Am I being foolish?" "You are being brave," Grisha said, "just as you have always been." "Your grandfather Samuel would be proud," Vincent added, "and so are we." "I could not have done any of this without you," Hope said. "Without your example. You showed me that love is stronger than hate. That courage means choosing kindness even when it is hard. Everything I am, everything I believe, comes from you." Vincent pulled his daughter into a hug, Grisha joining them to create a circle of family. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Vincent's final years were peaceful. He continued working, though at a slower pace, and spent his time with family and friends. He watched his grandchildren grow, 3 in total by the time he reached 70, and delighted in teaching them the skills his father had taught him. He and Grisha would often sit on their porch in the evenings, just as they had done for decades, and watch the settlement bustling with life. It had grown beyond anything they had imagined, a thriving community of thousands now, with humans and orcs living and working side by side. "We did well," Grisha said one evening. "We did," Vincent agreed. "No regrets. None. You, only that we did not find each other sooner." Vincent laughed. "We found each other at exactly the right time. Any sooner and we would not have been ready. Any later and we might have missed our chance." Grisha leaned against him, and they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The air was warm, carrying the scent of growing things and the sound of children playing. It was a good life, a full life, and Vincent felt grateful for every moment of it. When Vincent passed away at 73, surrounded by his family, his last words were to Grisha. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything, for loving me, for building this life with me, for showing me that the world could be better than I thought." Grisha held his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing love, for being my partner in all things." Vincent smiled, squeezed her hand one last time, and closed his eyes. He went peacefully, without pain, and with the knowledge that he had lived well and loved deeply. The settlement mourned his passing, holding a ceremony that lasted 3 days. People from all the nearby settlements came to pay their respects, sharing stories of how Vincent had touched their lives. His grandchildren spoke of his kindness and wisdom. Hope spoke of his courage and compassion. And Grisha spoke simply of her love for him, of the impossible bond they had shared, of the life they had built together against all odds. Vincent was buried on a hillside overlooking the settlement, in a spot where he could watch over the community he had helped build. Grisha visited his grave every day, bringing flowers and speaking to him as if he could hear. And perhaps he could. Perhaps in some way, Vincent's spirit remained, watching over the world he had fought to make better. Grisha lived for another 10 years after Vincent's death. She continued her healing work, though at a reduced pace, and spent much of her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them stories of their grandfather, of the man who had walked into the forest to confront an orc and had ended up finding love. When Grisha passed away at 85, she was buried next to Vincent on the hillside. Hope arranged the funeral, making sure it honored both human and orc traditions. The settlement turned out in force, mourning the loss of one of their founders. At the burial, Hope stood over her parents' graves and spoke. "My parents taught me that love is an act of courage," she said. "That choosing to see past differences, to build bridges instead of walls, is the bravest thing a person can do." They lived that truth every day, and their love created not just me, but this entire community. Every settlement we have built, every alliance we have forged, every life we have touched, it all traces back to them. To a man who paid his debts and an orc woman who saw kindness in a human's eyes. They changed the world, and we are all better for it. The assembled crowd wept, but they also celebrated, because Vincent and Grisha's story was not a tragedy. It was a triumph. A testament to the power of love to overcome hatred, of courage to defeat fear, of hope to build a better future. Their legacy lived on in Hope and her siblings, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values. It lived on in the settlements they had inspired, in the slowly healing relationship between humans and orcs. It lived on in every person who chose love over hate, who saw individuals instead of enemies, who had the courage to build bridges instead of walls. Years turned into decades, and decades into generations. The settlements grew and prospered, eventually forming the foundation for a new nation built on equality and cooperation. It was not perfect, this new nation. There were still conflicts, still challenges, still people who clung to old hatreds. But it was better than what had come before, and it continued to improve with each generation. And on that hillside overlooking the first settlement, 2 graves stood side by side. Simple markers, bearing simple words. Vincent Thorne. Beloved husband, father, and friend. He chose love. Grisha Thorne. Beloved wife, mother, and healer. She chose courage. Together they changed the world.